What's going on, Los Angeles Bruin Nation, LAFB fam? Your dynamic duo, the Thriller and Madman, back together again for all of your UCLA Bruin football needs. So great to spend time with you as always and be together here on this Saturday morning. We've got a really interesting conversation going on, kind of the headline story of UCLA football here these last couple of days about wide receiver Kaedin Robinson. But before we get into it, my brother, how we doing? How you enjoying your Saturday here in beautiful West LA? Any fun plans for the weekend?
Man, so I'm trying to watch this UFC fight tonight, the Dustin Poirier fight.
Ooh.
So maybe splashing some money on that fight. We'll see.
Ooh, here we go.
Yeah, but yeah, it's going to be a fun one, man. I mean, I keep checking the calendar, wondering when college football is coming back. And we got an August 30th start date for UCLA football. So, man, the closer we get to that date, the happier Will is. And we're getting closer and closer every single day, man.
There we go. And folks, a happy Will is a happy life. You know, you hear the term happy wife, happy life. No. It's happy Will, happy life when it is all about UCLA football. Music to my ears, brother. We are 40 days away, just about, give or take, from kickoff. And my goodness, it's hard to believe. You know, that's the thing about football sometimes is like the off season, particularly for college, is so long, you know, where you're just like, it feels like you and your team have lived like 6 or 7 lives between the end of last season to the beginning of this season. So
and you had a child since then, man. Like that's
I've had a child. Yeah, I mean, that's how. So I've literally lived a different life, you know.
Yeah. It's wild, man. It's wild.
It's wild. It's wild to think about, you know. So, Thriller, I want to get into a hot topic here, and we're going to sort of keep this very objective and analytical. Kaedin Robinson's future with UCLA has come into the national spotlight. Story first broken by On3. Kaedin Robinson, obviously, to those that are unfamiliar, last couple of seasons with Appalachian State, really as Joey Aguilar's favorite target at App State, when we all believed Joey Aguilar was going to be our quarterback before that swap with Nico Iamaleava effectively ended up here. Kaedin Robinson comes in really decorated wide receiver. I think the expectation was he was going to either slot into that wide receiver one role or kind of a co-wide receiver one role with Gilmer. News breaking this week, Kaedin Robinson suing the NCAA because of eligibility concerns on his end and sort of breaking into that. Will, before we sort of hand it over to you to talk about kind of the player that potentially UCLA could get or could not get, I just think that it's important for our fans to understand, you know, this has been a very fascinating situation and a story. And I think it's leading to a very interesting place of sort of legislation here with college football moving forward, and particularly around the junior college, the JUCO eligibility. And, you know, the way the rules are sort of stated is if a player decides to go to JUCO instead of a 4-year school out of high school, you have a 5-year clock, essentially, to be able to exhaust your eligibility. So prior, you know, if it's just a pure kind of college play, you have a 4-year clock, essentially. And without it, you have a 5-year clock, essentially. But that clock needs to be sort of continuous amount of time. And so what's interesting, what the dilemma right now is with Kaedin Robinson, if we sort of go back to his history, is Kaedin Robinson in 2019 played for ASA Brooklyn, which was, you know, a junior college. Then 2020 was the COVID year, if you recall. Kaedin Robinson chose not to play, didn't play for anybody in 2020. Then in 2021, Will, you know, he sort of segued with UCF. He was with Central Florida, played 2 games, redshirted in 2021. And then the final 3 years, 22, 23, 24, was with Appalachian State. And so the question right now is, if you're applying kind of a 5-year clock, essentially, he had the 1 year at ASA Brooklyn. He had 1 year at UCF. He had 3 years at App State. In essence, that is sort of the clock. But the question comes in of A, because he redshirted at UCF, but then B, because of that COVID year, you know, what happens? You know, does that count towards the clock? Does that break the clock? You just sort of pretend like it doesn't happen. That's where it gets very interesting and nuanced, Will. And, you and I are not lawyers, and we're not, it's not our area to sort of say what is right and what is wrong. But that is sort of the dilemma that's going on. And I think the closest comp, if you will, to Kaedin Robinson is what happened with Diego Paiva of the quarterback at Vanderbilt. What was interesting in Pavia's case, I should say, Diego Pavia, is, he went from junior college to New Mexico to Vanderbilt, but it was very interesting. He spent 2 years in junior college in 2020 and 2021, then spent 2 years in New Mexico, 2022, 2023, and then spent last year at Vanderbilt where he really blew up in 2024. So that was 5 years total. Pavia sort of went to the NCAA and sort of fought legislation to say, even though my 5-year clock was up, there were tremendous NIL implications. If I knew that NIL was going to happen, I would not have done the second year in JUCO, in 2020 and 2021. I wouldn't have gone to New Mexico Institute, which was a JUCO at that time. I would have just gone straight to D1 if I had known about NIL. And so based on that argument, Pavia won and was granted an additional year of eligibility. So Kaedin Robinson is sort of, I think, using a similar argument to say, look, there's a lot of NIL that I'm leaving on the table here, to the tune, as it was reported, of $450,000 that UCLA was offering him in NIL for this upcoming season, which is information publicly available on the LA Times and so forth. So a lot of nuance here, Will, with Kaedin Robinson. There's like an NIL argument. There's like a 5-year clock argument. There's sort of an issue of redshirt. There's an issue of how do you think about the COVID year between what is continuous and what is not. So super nuanced. I think it's going to be very, very complex, but wanted to sort of lay that out in terms of, for our fans, that's really the trade and the conversation that's going on. But to you, Will, I'll sort of pose it more from a football standpoint. What's the player that UCLA would get if Kaedin Robinson was deemed eligible? And how big of a loss do you think it would be for this wide receiver room if Kaedin Robinson, unfortunately, won't be able to play for UCLA this year?
I think he gives them a receiver this receiving room doesn't have, which is the big physical outside X, if you will, when it comes to the play calling. Kaedin Robinson is 6'2", 205. He has, outside linebacker, safety size ability where he can go over the top and be just as physical with those guys on the outside. Yes, Quasi Gilmer is 6'2", but he's 180 pounds.
Right.
Jaden Wilson's 175 pounds. You got, Mikey Matthews coming from Cal. We're very excited about. He's 5'9", 180. They don't have that big physical threat on the outside. And when this guy plays, great things happen. I made the tweet, 1,700 yards over the last 2 years, 12 touchdowns for Appalachian State. He was all Sun Belt both of those years. Is coming off of an ACL injury that kind of ended his season a little earlier last year with Appalachian State. But I think we can all agree that if this guy's on the football field, the potential is very, very high for UCLA's offense with a quarterback throwing the ball in Iamaleava. So you add a Kaedin Robinson to that mix of different receivers. It gives them something they don't have, and it gives them not only, a possession receiver on the outside, it gives them an immediate red zone threat that's proven time and time again to get in the end zone, which Quasi is a fantastic route runner, but I don't know if he possesses that 50-50 ball skills that Kaedin Robinson does.
You really well said there, Will. And I think, it's so spot on because when you think about the wide receiver room, to your point, you've got these longer, wiry, deep threats, right, to the tune of Gilmer and to the tune of Jaden Wilson. And we think that Gilmer is going to make a big step. Hopefully, he's sort of in the weight room, maybe putting on 5-7 pounds of muscle where he can sort of maintain that top end speed, but be a little bit more physical on the outside to be a bit more eligible receiver, let's call it, in these 50-50 ball situations. And then along with these sort of wiry deep threats, you've got your classic slot guys to the tune of Mikey Matthews and Titus. And so, you've got those out routes and those digs from a 7 to 9 yard perspective. And then you got the deep shots to the tune of 30, 40, 50 yards. But what about in between? What about in between 10 and 30 yards? And that historically has been something that UCLA has really leveraged the tight end position for. And we know our decorated lineage of tight ends from Dulcich, last year with Matavao, and the list goes on. But with some, Hudson Habermill coming off of injuries, we've lost some guys. We got some young guys. The reliance on a big outside weapon is going to be even more critical, not just to sort of open up the field for these other types of wide receivers, but also sort of fill that void of sort of what your tight end would be doing in a particular system, particularly in those difficult, highly constrained areas like the red zone, like you're going 3rd and 10 from the opposing 25, where precision really matters, but you need a guy that's going to eat up a lot of space, be physical, box out, and really find a way to a particular reception. And that's kind of the skill set that Kaedin Robinson really brings. And Will, when we think about that Indiana offense of last year, and you and I bring that up a lot because of Tino Sunseri, because that is that historical frame of reference, we've mentioned a guy like Elijah Surratt a lot, right? And Surratt's a little bit bigger, slightly, but he's that frame of Kaedin Robinson. And when you look at what a Surratt did at Indiana last year, what the expectations are, what he's going to do this year in that system, it just shows you how much of an enabler and how much of a marquee player an individual of that size is going to play in this system. So really, really significant. Lots to watch for, Bruin fans, here in the next few weeks. What makes me a little bit nervous, Thriller, is that, we're only 40 days from kickoff. So I just hope that this situation gets resolved one way or the other, and it's sort of a win-win for all parties moving forward. But I think we're going to be monitoring this closely. And your thoughts, Will, as we wrap up this conversation?
Yeah, it's interesting topic because you look at eligibility and what that may mean. Dylan Gabriel, who was his quarterback at UCF, is a perfect example of this. He played from 2019 through 2024. That is 6 years of college football as it stood. And they gave him an extra redshirt year. There's different cases for different metrics. But he played 3 games at UCF, and they gave him an extra redshirt year to get that 6th year. You talked about some of the different guys filing these petitions, Diego Pavia being a great example of that. There was another player that, filed a trademark at Rutgers, who was a JUCO guy, came in. He has 5 years of technical experience, but he got approved. So every NCAA case is different. But what I can assure fans and people that are watching is if we are allowed to have Kaedin Robinson on the football field this year, he's going to be a difference maker if he's healthy and the guy that we saw at Appalachian State the last 2 years. So keep an eye on this. We'll see what happens, with the NCAA ruling. But Kaedin Robinson is a baller, and that is fact.
Absolutely, Will. So well said. And I think it's just the new world that we're living in. And when you couple, everything that's going on with NIL, unlimited transfer portal, you throw in redshirt complexity on top of that, you throw in COVID complexity on top of that in terms of these timelines, it's just not, there's so much gray area, on both sides. These are such nuanced types of scenarios and so case by case. So as always, Bruin fans, we got your back. We're going to be monitoring this situation. Let's hope for the best, not only for the team, but for Kaedin, for the NCAA, for everybody involved. And as soon as something breaks, we'll let you know. But man, Kaedin Robinson, absolute stud, absolute baller. And it would be absolutely sensational if UCLA was able to get him in this wide receiver room in 2025. Bruin fans, have a great rest of your weekend, great next couple of days. And as always, the Thriller and Madman got you covered. We'll see you in a few days. 4's up forever, baby. 4's up forever.